It's time for lunchtime learning with Garden State CLE. Today's CLE deals with a topic which is near and dear to my heart and to our special guest, Mark Bernstein, attorney at law in Cherry Hill, right?
Correct.
And the whole state. Now, you don't necessarily specialize in gambling law. This is just something you know a whole lot about because you like to gamble, correct?
Yes, I grew up around a bunch of, I don't want to say degenerates, but famous people that were gamblers.
Okay. And just as a practical matter, what's your favorite thing to gamble on in New Jersey?
Poker or sports betting,
Okay.
both legal.
I take it, I haven't seen any bankruptcy filings in your name lately, so I take it you're fairly successful at it. Would you agree?
It varies day to day.
All right. So we have basically three different positions we're going to take today with our CLE. Position number one, we're going to review the history of gambling law in New Jersey, which has been, it's really should be the subject of its own law review article. That's number one. Number two, we're going to talk about the current state of gambling law in New Jersey. And most importantly, number three, how you can advise your clients who want to go out and do some recreational gambling or gamble with friends in their homes or things of that nature, how they can set up a gambling situation that will be totally compliant with New Jersey law so they won't even inadvertently be in violation and subject to some type of prosecution. All right? So with that having been said, let's get started. Please follow along with your lesson plan. It'll help make more sense. And Mark will have some additional things to inform you about as we go on. I want to begin by telling you all a story. All right? It actually has a point to it. I'm the hero of the story, otherwise I wouldn't say it. Our law firm back in the 90s, do you remember that every year on Hamilton Avenue, they would have a parade on, what was that holiday?
Columbus Day Parade.
Columbus or
St. Patrick's Day.
St. Patrick's Day.
Oh.
Okay. And it was in
Horrible.
that era a really big deal. Our practice was right on the main street where all the action was. And so we would put on a big spread and people could come into the office and rob us blind. But it was very, very, very popular. Okay. And, you know, anytime you get a crowd of people together, you always have politicians. In this one particular year, Governor Florio was leading the parade. He's walking at the front of it, and everybody's cheering him and waving to him and things of that nature. He was a pretty popular governor at that stage. And out of the crowd comes this woman, kind of overweight, middle-aged woman, and runs up to him and hands him an envelope. Okay. Now, today in New Jersey, you get shot if you tried to do something like that, or, you know, people would be very suspicious about what was in the envelope. But he put it in his pocket and just kept on walking. And the woman who did this, her name, believe it or not, no coincidence, was Debbie. Debbie Storcella was her name. And what she said in the envelope was a letter that she hand wrote to the governor. And she said the following: "Dear Governor, when I was a little tiny girl, my mother and my father were put in jail for gambling offenses." Okay. And it has been many, many years since this happened, and the conviction is haunting my father, haunting my mother. And can you please do something to help us? Now, interestingly, I remembered that case because that was a big, big deal in Mercer County back in the late 1960s and I think early 70s. You have these two people who were prosecuted, tried, convicted, husband and wife, of engaging in all kinds of gambling activities, bookmaking, robbing public officials, and things like that. And they had to go to jail. And they had these little tiny children, which Debbie was one of them in that era. And they made a determination that the father would go to jail first and serve his sentence. I think he did it all at the county jail. And then when he was done, then the mother went into jail. And there was a huge public outcry about it at the time, but it didn't make any difference in that particular era. Gamblers went to jail. Okay. So, you know, she never heard anything back from the governor and just thought it was kind of a dead issue. And don't you know, on the last day of his term as governor of our state, Governor Florio issues a pardon for Storkey Storcella, the gambler. The wife did not make an application for executive clemency, but Storkey did through this letter, informal letter that Debbie wrote for him, and the governor pardoned him. Now, why this was important is Storkey and his family owned a little tiny store, and they had owned it in the 1960s, the 70s, the 80s, and, you know, they owned it up into the 90s. And unfortunately, that's where Storkey did a lot of his gambling, okay? But times moved on, and the store was doing very well. It was a little neighborhood store that everybody went into. They served lunch and sandwiches and things like that. And in the store, they had a lottery machine. And the lottery would not grant Storkey a license to run the machine. He could run the cash register, and the lottery machine is literally 1 foot away from his elbow, but he couldn't personally operate it because of his gambling conviction. So that meant that the store had to go through the expense of hiring somebody to sit there and run this lottery machine, okay, and dispense tickets all day long. So Debbie took the position that, okay, now my father's been pardoned, there should be no reason why he can't run the lottery machine. So they went to the lottery commission. I actually tried the case in front of the commissioner, and tried to explain to them that he's been pardoned, and there's a statute that says you really can't allow, there's no disability anymore because the guy's been pardoned. Okay, that was the position that we took. And the lottery commission was very friendly in the sense that they didn't have the cops throw me out, but they basically took the position, forget about it. Okay, you're a convicted gambler. We don't want gamblers showing up and gambling. In fact, in the decision that came out here, there's really something I've always thought was very amazing. A statement by the lottery commission, by their commissioner, said, the director said, quote, "I do not think that it is the best interest of the lottery to have a professional gambler as one of our agents." Well, with all due respect, I think it's exactly the opposite. It's fantastic to have a convicted gambler. This is somebody who knows the business and can, sell more lottery tickets. But that's the position they took. So the lottery positions was followed. Let me just read you what they said. "It has been the director's policy not to license convicted gamblers to serve as lottery agents. This is done to avoid a perception by the public that the taint of illegal gambling is in any way connected with our operations. For this reason, I've decided to uphold the denial of the pending application." All right. Now, everybody knew Storkey. Everybody knew that this was a thing in the past. It was at least 20 years, maybe longer, since it happened, and there was really no realistic possibility of the lottery system being tainted by having him sit and run the machine. But it is what it is. So the lottery denied it. And I had another attorney because I was too close to the family. You know how bad it is when you like your clients. So they filed an appeal with the appellate division, which is where you go to appeal a final agency determination. And the appellate division really just had no problem with kind of indicating that the lottery was in, they were completely justified in doing what they were doing. The statute that they cited dealing with pardon says the following, that once someone receives a pardon, this is under the Rehabilitated Convicted Offenders Act. The statute says the presentation to a licensing authority of evidence of a pardon shall preclude a licensing authority from disqualifying or discriminating against the applicant. Okay, makes sense to me, and that sounded like a good argument at the time. But the appellate division says no, that's not what that means. Just because you've been pardoned, we can't discriminate against you, but it doesn't mean that you're entitled to a license either, okay? And their argument basically is the following, that it says the wording does not direct the licensing authority to issue a license following a pardon, but rather prohibits a licensing authority from automatically disqualifying an applicant based on convictions alone, okay? So the bottom line is, and this very sad story, is that the appellate division upheld the decision of the lottery commission and denied Storkey his license. Okay, a very sad story, but it has legs to it in the sense that it is reflective of the general attitude toward gambling and gamblers that was prevalent in that time period and really had a long history behind it. And one of the things I really wanted to talk about, and you'll see this in your lesson plan, is this whole idea about gamblers go to jail. All right. This was an idea that came strictly through the mind of the Chief Justice and I guess some of the associate justices of the New Jersey Supreme Court back in the 1960s and 1970s. I used to think that the late Chief Justice Wilentz, who was the Chief Justice between 1979 and 1996, up to his passing, really was a tremendously influential autocrat, dictator, with respect to the judiciary and what the judiciary should and should not be doing in matters of social policy. All right, fine. But I had forgotten the power of Chief Justice Weintraub and the power that he exercised over the court in that era. And he was really kind of a role model for Chief Justice Walentz in terms of running the court like an autocrat and indicating what the law was and what it was going to be. All right. Now, when I say to you that, and you can see this in your lesson plan, there was a time prior to the 1979 enactment of the code when sentencing of gamblers in New Jersey was uniform and direct. All gamblers, including Storkey and his wife, by the way, went to jail without exception. Now, the reason this happened was because it was ordered by the Chief Justice. And in order to make sure that all gamblers would go to jail, he directed that sentencing in gambling cases be done by the assignment judge or a reliable judge appointed by the assignment judge, okay? The idea being, if you go to trial as a gambler and you get found guilty by the jury, or if you plead out, your case will be transferred to the assignment judge for the imposition of sentence, and jail will be part of it every single time, okay? The attitude toward gamblers was just kind of, I'm not sure if to use the word awful, but it was just that they just couldn't stand it. It was so...
Was this because of the tie to organized crime?
Yeah, I think so. But a lot of these people weren't involved in organized crimes. They're just little schlubs, you know. They get involved in, running numbers and things like that. And they all went to jail. I think it was actually a kind of a, bias against certain groups of people. Let me put it to you that way. The Supreme Court came out with a directive, okay, which actually was on the books for 40 years until they got rid of it. This was done by Chief Justice Weintraub. It's repeated in this Stasio case at 49 New Jersey 247. What year is that decision? 1967. I wasn't even born then. Here's what it says. Quote, the Supreme Court, this is a directive from the Chief Justice. The Supreme Court is of the view that it is essential for the fair and effective administration of criminal justice that judges in imposing sentences adhere to the same general policy in cases which may involve syndicated crime. Unfortunately, in gambling cases, efforts to achieve such uniformity, even in the same county, have not been successful when sentences have been imposed by whatever judge happens to be sitting at the time. Well, yeah. Accordingly, Supreme Court considers it necessary to require that the assignment judge in each county either personally handle all sentencing in gambling cases or designate a particular judge to impose sentence in all such cases, even though the case may have been tried or the plea taken before a different judge. Chief Justice went on to say the following: Supreme Court will appreciate your advising judges and prosecutors in your county with the counties of this policy and request that you keep me, Chief Justice, advised as to who will handle the sentences in gambling cases in each of your counties. And the commentary in the Stasio decision says, as a directive itself suggests, we adopted this approach to the problem of syndicated gambling because years of experience convinced us that the public interest required it. This is pure public policy coming out of the mind of the Chief Justice that all these people are going to have to go to jail. Okay? Why? Why do they have to go to jail? Well, let's see what they said. Here is a statement coming out of Stasio, which is, by the way, also written by Chief Justice Weintraub. Okay, this is the seminal case dealing with gamblers going to jail. Here's what the court said, written by the Chief Justice. Syndicated gambling is an area within which uniformity can be approached. Unlike most crimes, the factual picture is itself quite uniform. A bookmaker is a bookmaker and a runner is a runner. You can see they're going for the low-hanging fruit here. The details of the criminal event are pretty much the same. The demeanor of the defendant on the stand, if he takes it, ordinarily is not critical. The feel of one case is pretty much the feel of all others. Pre-sentence report sums up the crime and the offender. Okay? It's important to note that they just had zero tolerance for gamblers or people who were engaged in gambling. And the idea was they would all go to jail every single time without exception by order of the Supreme Court of New Jersey generally and Chief Justice Weintraub in particular. Okay. I've given you in your number 2 in your notes here the names of these directives. And note that this directive, 8-65, was around until 2005, 40 years later. That's how long this was on the books. In your lesson plan, it says here, the view of the appropriate sentence for convicted gamblers was based on the chief's long-held beliefs expressed through other jurists through a long line of case law from the 50s that both societal morality and the enforcement of existing criminal law demanded such sentencing. This is the quote I was looking for before. This is from the chief in Stasio. Here we are dealing with organized crime. Pay attention to this, Mark. This applies to you. The offense is in no sense an isolated excursion beyond the pale of the law, induced by engulfing circumstances. It may be that such as to a particular individual at the bar, and if he alone were implicated in the criminal operation, a judge might well deal with him as he would other first offenders. But when the offense serves the interest of a widespread conspiracy, it would be a mistake to think of the defendant as an isolated figure. He is part and parcel of an enterprise. The gambling racket is an ancient foe of society. It bilks the weak. See, Mark, bilks the weak. It wreaks homes and destroys men. Women too, I guess. It spawns embezzlement, larceny, and crimes of violence. It corrupts officialdom. You could say the same thing about alcohol, but I digress. It is reputed to be allied with other illicit traffic. The easy money it yields doubtless finds its way undercover into legitimate fields, there to continue as polluting course. Such is the scene a judge should see in dealing with an offense of this kind. He would be myopic if he saw no more than a defendant before him. As the trial court aptly observed, a fine would be a license fee for the operators, a minor experience in the lucrative venture. A racket cannot be curtailed if fronts and tools are easily available, and they will be unless the price is too high. Okay? So, did this get rid of gambling in New Jersey? Answer, no.
67.
Yep.
And ironically, in 1969, the state of New Jersey legalized the state lottery.
Gee, I wonder why.
So hypocritical.
Well, it's not hypocritical because at the end of the day, what's this all about? It's about generating money. That's what all this gambling is about, money for the state.
Yep. And then 7 years later, they legalized the casinos in 1976.
And how long had they had, horse racing and the flats and,
1939, horse racing.
Yeah, and it's all a money grab, okay? Money that they can take and not have to raise taxes. And, you can make an argument that that's the most regressive tax you can imagine. My heart breaks to see these people throwing money in the garbage can in these little stores, buying these lottery tickets that they have absolutely, statistically almost zero chance of winning. But the state takes advantage of the ignorance of people about statistical probability and the reality of that. And, it just generates more and more and more money for the state, every form of gambling, but especially the lottery, which is this most regressive tax I could possibly imagine. But all this kind of went out the window in 1979 with the enactment of the New Jersey Code of Criminal Justice. So effective September the 1st of 1979, now sentencing changed because first offenders were entitled to a presumption of non-incarceration in most offenses, especially if it's a DP level, 4th degree, 3rd degree, and the vast majority of gambling offenses are of that category. So that, in a large sense, ended this idea where just mere players and small potato people involved in the gambling industry in New Jersey would wind up going to jail. And I think, the legislature took into consideration in not enacting these laws, they didn't have anything really special for gamblers, except to the extent that they require by statute that gambling offenses, even if they're DPs and petty DPs, they only be done in superior court. And I think that's a vestige of the Chief Justice Weintraub dictum that all gamblers go to jail and it be handled by the assignment judge. Okay, that's really kind of a vestige of that idea. Okay, so statutorily, as you'll see, all gambling offenses have to be done in the superior court, even though it's a DP or a petty DP. Defendant may not be entitled to an indictment for that offense, but his case will be heard in the superior court. So the enactment of the code in 1979 really kind of changed things around. And Mark just said, and I have this in your lesson plan, I just want to read it in and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Even before the code went into effect, society's ideas about gambling were starting to change. In 1969 and 1976, the citizens voted to allow legalized state-run sanctioned gambling in the forms of lottery and casino gambling in Atlantic City. By 1979, the lottery was doing booming business, and in 1978, Resorts Casino Hotel opened for games of chance. Within a matter of few years, Resorts was joined by other hotels and drew millions of gamblers every year.